Sometimes there's some youth that won't even come out in public because, it's a mental health issue as well.
Tonight, Mouldy housing on First Nations not only makes people sick, it also takes a toll on youth and their quality of life.
So much effort and so much clear communication about what we wanted to see, and this is what we get.
Inuit expressed frustration over the government's Indigenous Languages Act and accused Trudeau of bad faith negotiations.
Here we are on the Pine River. It's a tributary of the Peace. It flows out of the Rocky Mountains, and there's pipelines all over here.
And we take you to ground zero of the gas industry in northeastern BC, where there's a need for jobs, but at what cost? Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould found herself in the eye of a political hurricane today. According to a report in the Globe and Mail, the Prime Minister's office had allegedly pressured her last October to intervene in a criminal case involving construction giant SNC-Lavalin. She reportedly refused to intervene and was eventually shuffled from Justice to Veterans Affairs last month. APTN's Todd Lamarand has reaction from Parliament Hill, beginning this morning with the debate on Indigenous Languages Act.
It was supposed to be the second reading of Bill C-91, the Indigenous Languages Act. But Conservative Indigenous Affairs critic Cathy McLeod had something else in mind.
Everyone was so proud when the Attorney General, the Justice Minister of Canada, was an Indigenous woman, and we congratulated her on her amazing success. We are now learning that this government threw her under the bus.
I would have thought that all members of this House would have more respect for our veterans than to consider transfer to the Ministry of Veterans Affairs as being thrown under the bus.
But when you have someone, and clearly now we know why, and clearly the reason is because, as she indicated, she was speaking truth to power. The Prime Minister's office cared more about their friends than they did about listening to someone with integrity and compassion.
According to the Globe and Mail report, the Prime Minister's office wanted Jody Wilson-Raybould to get federal prosecutors to cut a deal with SNC-Lavalin to avoid a trial. The Montreal-based company was accused of paying millions in bribes to public officials in Libya. At a press conference in Vaughan, Ontario this morning, Prime Minister Trudeau denied his office pressured Wilson-Raybould.
The allegations in the Globe story this morning are false. Neither the current nor the previous Attorney General was ever directed by me or by anyone in my office to take a decision in this matter.
Opposition leader Andrew Scheer believes otherwise.
Jody Wilson-Raybould lost her job for refusing to bow to pressure from the Prime Minister's office.
What proof that do you have?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's up to the Prime Minister to come clean on this.
Raybould gate-dominated question period. Both the NDP and Conservatives grilled the government.
And SNC-Lavalin was rewarded, Mr. Speaker. When they faced corruption and fraud charges, the Liberals leaned on their own Justice Minister not to go to trial but to get a plea deal. Yeah. Do Liberals seriously expect Canadians that all of these illegal and troubling events implicating the Prime Minister's office itself and their former Justice Minister are all somehow just a coincidence?
Yeah. Did the Prime Minister fire the Attorney General because she refused to do his dirty work? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister has said, no such direction was given to my predecessor. No such direction has been given to me.
In the Globe article, Wilson-Raybould refused to comment on any of the allegations, and she didn't answer any questions in the House of Commons. Todd Lamarand, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The mold problem in Cat Lake is causing more problems than just skin rashes. 2 politicians toured the community, and they say that young people there are developing mental health issues. More than 100 homes in Cat Lake First Nation have mold in them. Band leadership says it's caused skin disease and respiratory conditions in children and elders for years. Willow Fiddler reports.
After touring several homes in Cat Lake First Nation, Ontario MPP Saul Mamakwa says it's worse than he thought.
The state of the housing crisis is actually a health crisis, and we've seen firsthand on the respiratory issues that in the homes, and the children, the elders, and also the skin conditions that we see on the faces, the hands of the young, the very young, the most vulnerable.
But Mamakwa says the symptoms don't end there. Students are affected far more than people think.
Sometimes there's some youth that won't even come out in public because, it's a mental health issue as well. And we heard from a parent that said, my child is writing these notes, that she does not want to live. So it's very concerning, and that's why we need to see, the leadership, the province and the federal government. We don't need the bureaucrats here to kind of, try to minimize these things.
Federal MP Charlie Angus says Ottawa has a solution for some of these problems. It's called Jordan's Principle.
We need a Jordan's Principle application for many of the children who are not being seen.
For years, the people of Cat Lake have lived in mold-infested houses. A recent inspection confirmed what they already knew.
What they found was mold. First, they found 87 had real severe mold, and then now that climbed up to 98.
There's at least 60 families without proper housing, and it shows.
We have medevacs almost daily from people getting sick.
Who's it affecting mostly?
Mostly the children and elders, and those already with illness like people on diabetes.
One of those people is Ernie Wesley. The former chief says he moved into this house about 5 years ago and has had pneumonia 6 times since.
And I began thinking what was the cause of it, and then we started noticing. I think it's the house I'm living in.
Wesley says he tries to keep the mold away with bleach.
Because every month, like almost every month, somebody has to clean it up. Like it grows pretty fast.
Diagnosed with diabetes in his 20s, Wesley is now on dialysis at home. Once an active hunter and athlete, he now spends a lot of time at home here in his bedroom.
Sometimes I feel depressed, I can't you just get ready and go hunting, eh?
The leadership here says minuscule funding from Indigenous services has their backs against the wall.
We get $248,000 a year from the government to build 3 houses. We expected to make 3 out of 248, which means that the material we can afford with that is substandard. It just doesn't do it.
Wesley said Indigenous services isn't living up to their word.
The First Nations people always believed that, the first promises that were made, as long as the sun shines, the river flows, and the grass grows, right? We still live with that. We're still expecting that.
Chief Kiwe Cabo says he won't give up on his community and that he's considered applying for foreign aid.
Our elders are dying off. We need their knowledge, and we don't want mold to shorten their lives before they pass on the knowledge we need. And we certainly don't want our children growing up sick, and because they're going to be the future of Cat Lake.
Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Cat Lake First Nation.
Bill C-91, the Indigenous Language Act, was well received by First Nations and Métis leaders, but not Inuit. ITK President Natan Obed called it colonial, and Nunavut's land claim president says Obed is right. This is from E. Calloway.
Inuit groups were invested in Bill C-91, the Indigenous Language Act. But when it was introduced this week, there was no status for Inuktitut and no funding to help grow the Inuit language. Aluki Kutrik is the president of Nunavut Tungavik, who represent Nunavut Inuit.
What a waste. So much effort and so much clear communication about what we wanted to see, and this is what we get. And frustration, so much frustration.
She isn't alone. Natan Obed, president of ITK, which represents all Canadian Inuit, called the bill colonial and accused the government of negotiating in bad faith. Does Kuterik agree?
Absolutely. I think we're united as Inuit across this nation, from Inuit Nunangat. We're united in our views on what this legislation has done.
Inuit leadership wanted Inuktitut recognized as one of Canada's founding languages and funding to support that, and more.
We expected to see that there would be a commitment for essential services being available for Inuit in Inuktitut. And when I speak about essential services, I'm thinking about the school system, I'm thinking about health system, I'm thinking about the justice system.
85% of Nunavut residents are Inuit. Most of Nunavut's funding comes from one federal source or another. This language argument ties into everything.
Every issue in Nunavut is an Indigenous issue. In other parts of this country, people are able to say, oh, we'll talk about Indigenous issues now. But the reality of the matter here in Nunavut is that every issue is an Indigenous issue.
This kind of response from Inuit organizations is unusual. Generally, they lobby behind closed doors and stay diplomatic in public. Now, it seems things have changed. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Government employees in the Northwest Territories could be walking the picket line for the biggest strike the Territory has seen in decades. Our reporter Charlotte Morit-Jacobs has more.
There's a lot of tension in the Northwest Territories. 4,000 territorial government workers could be on the picket lines next week. The Union of Northern Workers representing GNWT employees have served strike notices this week. If mediation is not met this weekend, a strike would take place Monday. And many workers are frustrated.
Excuse me, why are you encouraging members to cross a picket line? Don't you know the history? Are you ignorant to the
This video, widely shared on social media, shows union employees asking the Premier what he would do should a strike happen.
We're talking about
Do you know how many of us have children? Some of the issues circle around salary increases and the government's use of relief workers. The GNWT employees have been without a collective agreement since 2016. Charlotte Morit-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
It's time for us to take a quick break, but first here's a look at what's coming up tonight on Nation to Nation.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. Our political panel of MPs discusses the newly tabled Indigenous Languages Act. It appears it'll get broad support from all parties, as Conservative MP Catherine McLeod says her party will get behind the legislation. More contentious is Bill C-69, currently before the Senate. It'll overhaul how projects from pipelines and dams are reviewed and approved. A lively discussion between McLeod and Parliamentary Secretary Mark Miller was the result. And Green Party leader Elizabeth May gives her thoughts as she calls C-69 an appalling piece of legislation. It's coming up right after the national news.
On the East Coast, we've got -7 for Charlottetown and snow, -2 and snow in St. John's, -16 and sunshine in Cartwright, -18 and snow in the Grand River, -6 for Val-d'Or, -1 and rain for St. Jovite. Lots of zeros in Ottawa, Peterborough, Toronto, and cloud. -17 in snow in Thunder Bay, -16 in snow in Wawa, -24 in Thompson, -27 for God's Lake and Norway House. -23 in Gimli, -22 in snow in Brandon. -26 in sunshine for Saskatoon, -25s for Yorkton and Regina. -23 in Buffalo Narrows and sunshine, -25 and sunny in Uranium City. Welcome back. The LNG Canada project will move natural gas from the northeastern BC to the Pacific coast. Laurie Hamlin went to ground zero of the project, where it's expected that thousands of new gas wells will be drilled over the 40-year lifetime of the project. And while there might be jobs and economic opportunities for local First Nations, some worry that the new wells will destroy an area already heavily impacted by industry.
Julian Napoleon grew up in the Peace River Valley in northeastern BC, the heart of British Columbia's gas industry.
I worry for the moose. I worry for all the wildlife. I worry for our water, our air. I worry for our people, you know, the safety of our traditional foods.
Napoleon has seen the impacts of the gas industry firsthand.
Here we are on the Pine River. It's a tributary of the Peace. It flows out of the Rocky Mountains, and there's pipelines all over here. This is an underground pipeline. Just downstream, there's the Enbridge's, the Sararis Murphy project that they were under construction last year. There's pipelines all over here. And this river, it had a chemical spill in it. I was maybe 13 or 14 when that last big spill was in this river, and it decimated the fish populations. They've never recovered to this day.
Natural gas from Napoleon's traditional territory has been fracked and piped for decades. Now, the industry is ramping up to frack more gas to send down the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which will run from Dawson Creek to Kitimat, then ship to Asian markets. 5 companies make up LNG Canada, and they're going to build more gas wells and infrastructure to get the gas moving. Shell Canada is one of the companies on board. They've introduced new well technology at their Groundbirch project in BC.
So this is the most recent pad that we've completed in Groundbirch, and every technology that we could put in place is here.
Dennis McKay is originally from Little Saskatchewan First Nation in Manitoba and has been working in Canada's gas industry for 20 years. McKay took us on a tour of Shell's Groundbirch facilities.
I take great pride in what I do, and I love what I do.
McKay says this new project reduces impacts to land and lowers greenhouse gas emissions.
Consolidating wells into one location rather than having 6 locations is just the footprint there and the means of clearing land and taking up that room. The fact that you can work on 6 wells in concurrence is another piece of that puzzle. And the technology here to reduce methane emissions. So at one time, fuel gas was used to control the valves in some of the systems here, where now it's an air system. We've gone to electric actuators rather than using any kind of hydrocarbon to drive it. And we're able to put the gas that would normally get flared during startup in line. So we have on-site separation when we're basically flowing the well back right after a frac. That gas now goes in line rather than putting it to atmosphere.
And McKay says Shell's Groundbirch water facility minimizes its fresh water use to frack the gas.
So we are in essence a poster child for the ability to use recycled water, manage our water, and even share it with some of our competitors in the very near area.
The industry needs a poster child, because so far the gas business has been a dirty one. Napoleon drove us out to his family's trapline near the Pine River. It had been used for many generations.
They came in here originally and put some pipelines through, and they put in the gas plant, and after that the entire thing got clear-cut logged, like everything. You know, it's had a full ecological collapse. It's no longer able to support viable populations of any of the fur-bearing animals that we used to like to trap.
Despite all the negative impacts, Napoleon says people here don't have much choice but to work for industry.
I have family, I have friends, people that I love that end up taking these jobs, and I'm just very mindful of not being judgmental of them. People taking that work isn't the problem. The problem is with the way that the industry is being managed by the government and those companies that are involved.
Shell, though, says the improvements at Groundbirch have gone above regulatory requirements, and their hope is that industry follows their lead.
Shell takes advantage of the evolution of technology, and working for a major, they've got the ability and the pockets to really support these initiatives and stand by what they say. And I'm part of that, and would I be here if I thought otherwise? Absolutely not. So this is best as you're going to get at this time.
Although Shell is trying to do better, Napoleon says he still fears for the future of his traditional lands and wildlife.
I'm very, very worried, actually, for the future here.
Laurie Hamlin, APTN National News, Northeastern BC.
We need to take another quick break, but first, here's the rest of tomorrow's weather. Off to northern Alberta, we've got minus 28 in sunshine in Fort Chip and Fort McMurray. Minus 22 in sunshine in Red Deer, minus 19 in Calgary and Lethbridge and snow. 1s for Campbell River and Vancouver and snow. Dease Lake is minus 16 and sunny, minus 18 and sunshine in Prince George. Beaver Creek is in at minus 17, as is Mayo, sunshine there, minus 13 for Whitehorse. Wattie is minus 30 and clear, minus 24 and sunshine in Yellowknife. Tuck is in at minus 5 and snow, minus 13 in cloud in Sax Harbor. Minus 28 for Baker Lake and Chesterfield, sunshine in those communities. And Resolute, clear skies, minus 25. Pangerton's in at minus 23 with a mix of sun and cloud. Access to Indigenous spiritual services while in jail is a charter right. From smudging to sweats, it can be an important part of rehabilitation for some inmates. So why is that access to so inconsistent across the country? Well, APTN Investigates reporter Tina Roche finds out in her episode, Sweetgrass Denied. Here's a preview.
The issues facing Indigenous people imprisoned are staggering. High rates of incarceration, segregation. Indigenous men and women are more likely to be classified as high security, less likely to be paroled.
It's a reminder of who you are and where you come from, and it's also healing.
While in jail, access to Indigenous spiritual services is critical. Ceremony, sweats, an elder, and smudging.
All the negativity that's in here cooped up, and when you're allowed to smudge, you can release all that, and it all goes away, and you start fresh with a fresh mind. It's very helpful.
Access to spirituality is also a charter right. Federal prisons recognize this and offer programs and services for Indigenous men and women in custody. But provincial jails are struggling to do the same. Access to programs is hit and miss, from one jail to the next. Anthony Peter Paul knows that firsthand.
Sometimes they'll allow you to practice native spirituality, or maybe there's an elder visiting there, and other times there's nothing going on.
It's still their right to be able to pray and to have sweat lodges. You know, that's our church.
What we heard from the men and women in custody was that they just don't get access to spiritual programming, to culturally appropriate programming.
What we figured along the way in the work with probations was that the mainstream programs or Western-focused programs were not working for Indigenous people.
That episode of APTN Investigates airs tomorrow right after your newscast. And that is all the news I have for you this Thursday. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Stay tuned now for Nation to Nation. Have a great night.